My name is Jeff Renew. I am the Armament Center historian at Picatinny Arsenal, New Jersey. Today, I will be presenting the African Americans of Picatinny Arsenal to celebrate Black History Month. Why Black History Week? Sergeant First Class James Jones poses the question in the Equal Opportunity newsletter of the Picatinny News on February 21st, 1977. Sergeant First Class Jones states that the purpose of Black History Week is to place emphasis on the segment of American heritage that is relatively unknown in our history texts and to make American history truly representative of all Americans. Black History Week will be celebrated every year until there is no longer a need for a time for special recognition, when blacks are included in our history and all the people are made aware of the contributions of blacks in our history. He further gives some background to the history of Black History Week. He states that Black History Week was sponsored by the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History, founded in 1915. Black History Week originated in 1926, coinciding with Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass's birthdays. The days do not always coincide in the same week, so in 1976, the association observed the entire month of February. From the Picatinny Historical Archive, dating to 1901, this is the earliest known photograph of African Americans at the Arsenal. Noting Picatinny Peak in the background, there was a significant amount of activity in the area of Lake Picatinny during the early years of the Arsenal, in an area originally known as Clifford's Pond. The original powder factory and proving grounds were located along the waterline. The men in the picture here enjoy a break from their work at a snack wagon from John H. Martin Fancy Baker, located in Dover. The precursor to our modern food trucks, John H. Martin Fancy Baker offered a variety of cakes and even ice cream. Former Picatinny Arsenal historian Patrick Owens notes in this 2011 article that until the Second World War there is no written account of African American contributions to the Arsenal. That all changes in December of 1941. Without African Americans, the Arsenal could not have met the demands of supplying the needs of sustaining a world war. An interesting part of Picatinny's World War II era history and its link to African Americans is found in baseball. Picatinny's baseball history dates back to the First World War, and by the summer of 1942, the Arsenal fielded a semi-pro baseball team, called variably the Picatinny All-Stars and the Picatinny Bombers. The Picatinny team played a series of exhibition games with Negro League baseball teams, such as the Black Yankees and the Cubans. The first game with the Black Yankees took place on 13 July 1942 at Dover High School. This article from the Picatinny News shows that the Black Yankees thoroughly beat the Picatinny team. All Stars lose games 7-1. Black Yankees outclass Picatinny, Cuban team to play. From the box scores, Black Yankees take an early lead, 2 runs in the first inning. Sweeney walks Ford and Wilson, singles by Williams and Parker send them home. Picatinny scores a single run in the 5th inning. Cascio reaches on an error. Mascio single scores Cascio. The Black Yankees score 1 run in the 6th inning when Sweeney walks Stark with loaded bases. The Black Yankees score 4 runs in the 7th. Numerous Picatinny fielding errors occurred. The Picatinny baseball team didn't do much better in the second game played with the Black Yankees in August of 1942, again at Dover High School. 3 runs scored in the first inning sealed the Picatinny team's fate. The cartoon at the right appeared in the Picatinny News accompanying the article reporting the game. The artist jokes that the only way that Picatinny will get a strikeout is if the pitcher uses a cannon to pitch the ball. This article recounts Picatinny Night at the Apollo. Awards were presented to 26 African Americans that worked at Picatinny and lived in Harlem. A recruitment drive was also initiated the same evening. The drive was so successful that an additional recruiting station was placed in the YMCA on 135th Street. Soldiers returning from the European Theater of Operations were shuttled around Manhattan in jeeps with Picatinny Arsenal signs on them. 21 theaters in Harlem played 4-minute Picatinny recruitment advertisements before feature films. An African-American soldier that was wounded in action, named Jesse Evans, was a Picatinny employee before entering service. He made appearances with the recruitment films at the theaters to urge African Americans to work at Picatinny and support the war effort. He placed special emphasis on the 60mm and 81mm mortar ammunition and 105mm howitzers. 1,017 employees were hired in a single month directly as a result of this recruitment effort. Dedicated buses provided transportation to the arsenal from 124th Street. They ran daily at 5:45 a.m., 2:15 p.m., and 9:45 p.m. Because of the success, a luncheon was held at the Biltmore Hotel on 44th and Park for the residents of Harlem that organized and participated in the recruitment drive. 370 people attended. Picatinny Commander Colonel William Larned and the Chief of Ordnance of the New York District were in attendance. These photos from the Picatinny Historical Archive show 3 African Americans conducting manufacturing work during World War II. The woman on the left is loading bulk explosives into a melt kettle. Once molten, the explosive will be poured into shells waiting in a cart in the floor below. The woman in the center photograph is weighing propellant and pouring it into a 37mm cartridge case. The man on the right is stenciling the nose assembly of a 36-inch bomb for use in the Little David rifled mortar, designed to break the German defenses of the Siegfried Line. These are just a few of the examples of the many jobs performed by African Americans at the arsenal during the war. In the archives of the Schoenberg Center for Research in Black Culture in the New York Public Library resides a few photos from December of 1944, where the predominantly African American workers in Building 210 at Picatinny are enjoying a chorus of arsenal workers singing spirituals. During World War II, Building 210 was part of the loading division, where fuse and detonator components were loaded with explosive boosters and charges. Annie Matthews was one of the employees of the loading division working in Building 210 during the war, pictured in the previous frame. She had 5 sons in service, fighting for our country, as this April 1944 article from the Picatinny News reports. Wilfred was in the Army Quartermasters in the Pacific. Robert, a former Picatinny employee, was in the Navy in the North Atlantic. Richard was in the Merchant Marines. Ernest was in the 433rd Squadron as an MP. Walter, also in the 433rd Squadron, was an Army mechanic. Lieutenant Vincent J. Mason was an employee of the loading department before becoming one of the famed Tuskegee Airmen. The 332nd Fighter Group was the first all-African American fighter squadron. Prejudice against African Americans prevented them from flying in World War I, and that same prejudice nearly prevented the creation of the 332nd Fighter Group. The famed P-51 Mustangs were recognizable by their red tails. The unit received 3 Distinguished Unit citations during the war in the Sicilian Campaign, the Monte Cassino Campaign, and the skies over Berlin in 1945. Lieutenant Mason was commissioned in November of 1943, and he was quoted as saying, "I must work harder now than ever." He was a fighter pilot squadron leader and suffered a fatal crash in 18 March of 1944. Corporal Hallard S. Pullard was a maintenance division employee. He was killed in action on 24 January 1945 a machine gunner protecting his field artillery unit. This was during the German counterattack after the Battle of the Bulge, in an attempt to cut supply into the Ardennes. This attack was halted on 25 January 1945 by the 222nd Infantry, a day after Corporal Pollard died. He is the 60th name on the Picatinny Honor Roll of employees that died in service, and is the second Picatinny Arsenal African American to die in World War II. Genevieve Jones and Marion Tanner were the first African Americans and first women to work as chemists in the explosives branch on the Arsenal. Genevieve Jones was a pharmaceutical chemist and practiced pharmacy for 2 years before working at Picatinny. Marion Tanner had a Bachelor of Science at Wilberforce University and was awarded a scholarship at the University of Pittsburgh. Both women started work at Picatinny as classified laborers early in 1942. They were transferred to the explosives research branch due to their education and previous scientific experience. Some other firsts for African American women at the Arsenal during World War II, Laura McMillan and Amanda McKee, along with Marion Tanner, were the first women to manufacture ether and alcohol rectification at the Arsenal. Virginia Venable, Maggie Fields, and Mary Morris, not pictured here, were the first 3 women and first African Americans to work on Tetra Hill. Jamaicans came to work at Picatinny Arsenal as part of an agreement between the War Department and the Crown Colony of Jamaica. The first group of Jamaicans totaled 247 people, and a second group of 284 arrived 2 months later. The first group lived at the former Civilian Conservation Corps camp in Hackettstown, while the second lived in similar CCC housing in Whippany. The only Jamaican fatality at Picatinny occurred on 21 June 1945, when Sadamon Miller died of heat exhaustion during a cricket match. He is buried at the Heavenly Rest Cemetery in Hanover, New Jersey. Dr. Bertil Lloyd started his career at Picatinny Arsenal during World War II as a physicist and continued for decades beyond to become the chief of many important divisions on the Arsenal. Born in Jamaica, Dr. Lloyd earned his bachelor and doctorate degrees from the University of Illinois, graduating in the top 3% of his class. His master's degree was from the University of Toronto. Preceding employment at Picatinny, he was a physics professor at Philander Smith College in Arkansas. During World War II, Dr. Lloyd was hired as a physicist at Picatinny, and he performed the duties of a liaison for the Jamaican workers. He went on to become acting chief of the engineering, chief of the radiographic unit, the X-ray inspection office, chief of theoretical physics, and by 1959, chief of the special projects unit, at a time when special projects was a veiled reference to atomic and or nuclear artillery and warhead research. He was the author of 2 books, which are not in the archive, but I would like to find copies: Liquid Solubilities in Systems Containing Furfol, 1934, and The Kinetics of Thermal Decomposition of Hydrogen Peroxide, 1930. Dr. Lloyd became a citizen of the United States in 1940. The petition for naturalization shows that he and his wife Edna were married in February of 1935 in Chicago. He entered the United States via New Orleans, first in September of 1922, and again in 1933. The second, he was returning to obtain his doctorate from the University of Illinois after briefly leaving the country to obtain a master's degree from the University of Toronto. The naturalization card pictured shows that Dr. Lloyd's citizenship was approved on 26 June 1940. In the months immediately preceding employment at Picatinny, Dr. Lloyd spoke at a meeting of the Champaign-Urbana Consumers Cooperative. He spoke out against discrimination in the United States and the effect of Jim Crow in preventing African Americans from reaching their full potential. He advocated education as the means to overcome the disparity in opportunity and social standing. True to his belief that education was the key to equality, Dr. Lloyd ran for and was elected to the Board of Education of Rockaway Township, where he was the president. Before this could happen, Rockaway had to vote that the election be nonpartisan, because the Hatch Act prevented federal employees to run for office affiliated with any political party. The pictured article from the Rockaway Record commends Dr. Lloyd and another African-American man, Oliver Sheffield, from Denville. The editor addresses racism and responds to a letter quoted within the article that made racist generalizations. The editor of the Rockaway Record states, "We can't resist the temptation to point out the stupidity of condemning any large group of human beings because of the real or fancied shortcomings of some individuals. A person who would write such a letter could not equal Dr. Lloyd and Mr. Sheffield in service to the community and nation if he lived 1,000 years." Now in the 1950s, we see James Harley, Picatinny Arsenal guard and member of the Picatinny Arsenal pistol team. The pistol team consisted of members of the Guards and Picatinny Fire Department. The team competed in the International Police match in Teaneck and the North Jersey Revolver matches in Paterson, winning 2 trophies. Additional future competitions mentioned in this article included Quantico, Reading, and Sparrows Point. The Inquiring Photographer was a column in the Picatinny News that posed questions to the workforce and published the answers received. This particular question, documenting the reactivation of the Picatinny News, requests suggestions from the employees about what content to include in the paper. 2 African American employees responded. Joseph Anderson of the Service Department wants to see articles about what's happening on the Arsenal and articles that publicize sports and social events. Vivian Talbert of the Loading Division wants a column specifically for carpooling, since she seems to have difficulty finding regular transportation to and from work. Many of the mass transit options to the Arsenal that were available during World War II have subsided by the early 1950s. Joyce Haley was a physicist at Picatinny Arsenal in 1963. She was a graduate of the Hampton Institute in Virginia and was one of 4 students selected to study radioactive isotopes at the Oak Ridge Institute of Nuclear Studies. She worked in the Warheads and Special Projects Laboratory in the Nuclear Division at Picatinny. This article from the Picatinny News focuses on her selection as Miss United Negro College Fund. Lieutenant Colonel Terrence Harris of PM Improvised Explosive Device Defeat receives the Secretary of the Army Product Manager of the Year Award for 2012. He managed the majority of the Army IED defeat projects, including Self-Protection Adaptive Roller Kit, or SPARK, and was a representative of PMCCS. He forward deployed to Afghanistan in July through November of 2011 to personally deliver the counter-IED products to the soldiers. He was the PEO Ammo Senior Representative in Theater. Dr. Dion Serbin is a graduate of the New Jersey Institute of Technology, College of Engineering. She began her career at Picatinny in 1989 as an artillery engineer on the 155mm M864 Pick'em program. In 1991, she received the Operation Desert Storm Award for supporting American troops during the Gulf War. In 1995, she received the Master of Business Administration from Seton Hall University and was the first African American president of the Picatinny chapter of the Federally Employed Women. In 2003, she became a quality engineer in the Quality Engineering and Systems Assurance Directorate supporting 60mm and 81mm mortar systems. In 2004, she was promoted to GS-13 as a program management engineer for Project Manager Maneuver Ammunition Systems. 2006, she was promoted to NH4 as a Project Management Officer in PEO Ammunition. 2007, she joined the U.S. Naval Sea Systems Command, Dahlgren Detachment, as the Deputy Program Manager of PM Navy Conventional Ammunition Systems. Brigadier General Patrick Burden was the first African-American senior commander of Picatinny Arsenal. He commanded the arsenal from October of 2014 to November 2016. General Burden was commissioned in the Field Artillery in 1987. He has a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from Alabama A&M University. He has a Master of Information Management Systems from the Florida Institute of Technology. General Burden's awards include the Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Army Meritorious Service Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, and the Army Achievement Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster. Brigadier General Alfred Abramson was Senior Commander of Picatinny Arsenal from November 2016 to May 2020. Brigadier General Burden started a new tradition at the change of command ceremony by handing the keys of Picatinny Arsenal's historic Cannon Gate to Brigadier General Abramson upon assuming command. As Joint Program Executive Officer for Armaments and Ammunition, Brigadier General Abramson directed, planned, and oversaw execution of 200 separate Army modernization projects valued at $2.6 billion. General Abramson was commissioned a second lieutenant in the Chemical Corps after receiving a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from the Virginia State University. He served as Battalion Chemical Officer for the 637th Field Artillery, Smoke Platoon Leader for the 172nd Chemical Company, and as a Chemical Staff Officer for the Project Manager's Office for Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Defense. His awards include the Defense Superior Service Medal, Defense Meritorious Service Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster, Army Meritorious Service Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster, Joint Service Commendation Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, and the Army Achievement Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster. General Abramson was the commander of Picatinny Arsenal at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that concludes the presentation on Picatinny Arsenal's African Americans. I would like to thank and acknowledge John Donato of the Historical Society of Rockaway Township and the Picatinny Arsenal Historical Society for his assistance in the research in local media, specifically for information about Dr. Bertil Lloyd.